Yo, what up gamers, I'm Dark, and for those who don't know me, I'm an ADC main who's peaked Master Tier in Seasons 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and now 12. Over the past 8 days or so, I've achieved Master in Season 12, and while this achievement by itself is nothing new to me, there's a couple of things that make it different to previous seasons. The first is that this time it was quite easy. This is the fastest into any season that I've ever hit Master, and not only that, but it's the first time that I've ever had 2 accounts in Master at the same time, as I managed to get my Smurf into Master 2 days after my main account. The reason why I found it so easy this time around was that I actually put a lot of effort into improving outside of the game. I was doing constant Challenger VOD reviews in my free time, taking notes, and playing games directly after to practice and reinforce the things I was learning. While it would be impossible to teach you absolutely everything that goes into making a Master ADC, I will tell you some of the basic things that I was personally focusing a great deal on in order to make it into Master. We'll start off with the very start of the game, level 1 cheesing. One thing I noticed was that Challenger games would often start with both supports immediately running bot at the start of each game and warding the middle bot lane brush in order to see level 1 cheeses coming and play around them. Since I observed the supports in my piss low high diamond games were almost never warding the brush, I decided I could take advantage of that by cheesing. Every game I went straight to the bot lane brushes, and if my jungler ends up not needing a leash, I ping my support to come with me and we cheese. Almost every time this happens, we end up getting a massive HP advantage at level 1, if not just straight up getting a kill. It's an amazing, easy way to get a very early lead that over 99% of the player base does not properly respect. There's just simply no reason why you shouldn't do this every game if you have an even remotely competitive level 1 compared to the enemy bot lane. You should even ask your jungler if he could possibly start topside to maximize your chances of getting to pull out this cheese. It might sound selfish, but it's not. It's a simple fact that the average player on both teams doesn't try to make any lane winning plays at level 1 whenever they don't have to leash. As the one player who will try and do this every game that you don't have to leash, it is literally in your team's best interest every game to simply not make a leash and allow it to cheese instead. You won't be able to convince them every game, but at least asking should go a long way. Here are some things to be wary of while cheesing, however, as it's possible though unlikely to actually disadvantage yourself while doing it. For starters, focusing the support is fine, but you have to be sure that you as the ADC are not taking too much damage for it unless the support will actually die. In this clip, for example, you see us poking out Sona and then I take too much return damage from Zeri that it makes the trade completely disadvantageous to us, since their support lost half their HP, but so did our ADC, and damage onto the ADC is much more valuable than damage onto the support. In that particular instance, it probably would have been fine if I didn't overcommit for 1 auto too many onto Sona, which then allowed Zeri to chase me down the way she did, which leads us into my other piece of advice of know when to end the trade. Remember, you're fighting on the enemy wave, so the only advantage you have is the element of surprise. Once that advantage has been utilized, unless you're going to get a kill, it's best to back off. Sometimes depending on how poorly the enemies react, you can chunk someone out very low or even kill them, but other times you should feel satisfied with just an ability and a couple of autos and back out. It depends on the enemy bot lane's capabilities and who you started out focusing, the support or the ADC. Though I've only covered the level 1, you should be on the lookout for cheese opportunities throughout the rest of the game as well, either when returning to lane or by faking out the recall. In this particular clip, my Nautilus died on a mid roam after being counter-ganked by Jhin and Thresh, so as they're returning to lane, I run away to not get ganked by them. Though I have plenty of time to recall, I don't have much I could back for, so I take the risk of waiting to see if they'll fall for a cheese. I hide in one of the bushes and stay out of sight for as long as I can, and Thresh, having the right idea, scouts the bushes to make sure I'm gone, but makes the mistake of not checking the furthest brush where I retreated to stay out of sight. As the enemies assumed I was in base, Jhin overextends hard and gets basically one-shot before he can so much as take a lantern. Even had Thresh been closer to him, you can clearly see that there was no way he could survive a fight when I had such a good flank on him, as he would simply take too much damage no matter what. In this next clip, Kai'Sa and my support had just traded 1 for 1, and as I shove in the wave, I see Nautilus stayed on 40% HP, meaning he has doomed himself to having to back as soon as Kai'Sa gets back into lane. Realizing this, although I can already back for Noonquiver, I decide to back out of vision and pretend to have backed, while pinging Seraphine to come straight to bot to punish Kai'Sa. Thinking she was alone with Seraphine, Kai'Sa wasn't willing to give up farm and immediately dies upon re-entering the lane, punishing Nautilus's poor back timing. Though his back timing was objectively bad, it was a mistake that would have gone unpunished had I just made the obvious choice of backing for Noonquiver. The next thing I want to talk about is how to impact bot lane. It's well known that supports dictate the majority of the lane, and many ADC players struggle to impact the lane. If we assume that 90% of bot lane is the support and ADCs are the remaining 10%, it would be a mistake to assume that means you will only affect the outcome of your lanes 10% of the time. For example, if you're the best player of the 4 players on bot lane, you can absolutely outplay anything the enemy support tries to do, and it makes their 90% influence over the lane go to waste compared to your own support's influence. If you're outplaying everything the enemy support does and the enemy ADC is not outplaying everything your support does, then you are effectively using your 10% influence over the lane to convert your superior skill over the enemy ADC into a win. Take the following clip for example. Here I'm initially in an unfavorable position for trading against Samira and Rel, but as they walk up I take the trade anyway. I do this because I'm confident in my ability to dodge Rel W, and I know that if she misses, it'll lead to a very good fight once Pyke arrives. Knowing this, Rel doesn't even risk the W, and I start off with a large health advantage over Samira before the 2v2 even begins. Following this, Pyke lands a hook onto Rel, which puts me at risk of getting hit by Rel W if I capitalize on it. I know this and do it anyway, and perform a very narrow dodge in the following Rel W. A fight that could have led to a very bad trade for me instead turns into a potentially deadly fight for Rel, who has to run for her life. As Pyke pulls out a beautiful bait and switch by hooking Samira instead, the earlier 1v2 trade that left Samira at 70% HP comes into relevance as she doesn't bother flashing away, knowing she will die anyway. Now don't get me wrong, Pyke played this entire fight beautifully from start to finish. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen a better executed Pyke level 1 in my life. He forced the fight and is the one who set up the kill opportunity. But it's important to highlight how my lesser contributions with no noticeable immediate impact were also beautifully played in this instance, and were the reason why the fight Pyke forced was so favorable to us in the first place. The first hook onto Rel doesn't mean much if I don't bait out Rel's engage and dodge it, and the second hook onto Samira doesn't actually lead to a kill if she's not already low from my 1v2 trade. For Pyke to have such a perfect play available to him, he needs me to perform those two prior little outplays that didn't seem to have any instant ramifications. That is the 10% impact at work. I outplayed the Rel W while Samira failed to outplay the Pyke hook. I may not have done anything special to her directly in this clip, as both of my outplays were dependent on Rel and her actions, but it's clear which ADC had the greater impact in this fight overall. Had she been as effective at drawing and outplaying Pyke's attention as I was to Rel, it might be a different story. And speaking of that story, its morale is that in order to impact your lane, you need not just mechanics, but also the knowledge of their limits and the will to test them. Me being capable of dodging that Rel W means nothing if I don't play like it. If I'm not confident if I can dodge it, I never take the 1v2 trade and I never bait it out following the Pyke hook. Without the knowledge of what my mechanics afford me, I'm just a passenger to Pyke's plays, never altering the outcome beyond the absolute minimum of what is expected of me. That being said, without the mechanical ability to execute this clip still looks quite a bit different. The 1v2 trade still happens as Rel never threw out her W, but after the Pyke hook I failed to dodge the W and I get chunked out by Samira far worse than I chunked her out previously. The two must be in perfect sync, the ability to execute as well as the will to execute. The former being low will result in misplays, the latter being low will result in wasted potential and lower impact. It is up to you to test your limits and figure out what it is that you are capable of, and constantly working to improve on it. The better you become, the more you will be capable of. Next up, we'll talk about how to impact the rest of the game as an ADC. Everything I just mentioned about mechanics and will to execute them still applies, but to a lesser extent. There are two main issues people tend to have with ADC role, and both issues have the same kind of solution. The first is that ADC players feel like they get one-shot by anything. Although this is just meant to be a natural weakness of the class, this issue is further compounded by the fact that bot lane XP leaves you underleveled compared to solo laners and junglers. This is bad because as a class that generally doesn't build survivability, all of your defenses come from your base stats. The lower your XP, the lower your base stats. The second issue is that your potential to make plays in teamfights is very limited. This is once again compounded by your low survivability as an underleveled character, but again, this is also just meant to be a natural weakness of the class. You are the backline damage dealer. Your role is simply to deal damage while everyone else sets you up. This leaves the class feeling very stat checky in nature. Either you have the damage to kill the entire enemy team before they kill yours, or you don't. This is especially noticeable when facing tanks. It doesn't matter how good your mechanics are, they simply won't make that sound die any faster. You either have the damage to kill him, or you don't. In order to succeed in the ADC role, you need to maximize your chances of being able to win that stat check. To do this, every action you take after laning phase must be with the goal of making you the most fed person in the game. The first way I'll talk about how to achieve that is by not dying. Time spent dead is time not spent farming. This is way more important to keep in mind out of laning phase though, than in it, for a few reasons. The first and most obvious one is that the longer the game goes, the longer your death timer. The later you die, the more time you'll spend not farming. But the opportunity cost for each second of being dead is also much greater later on than it is during the laning phase. In laning phase, you're basically limited to 6 or 7 minions every 30 seconds, almost without exception. Sometimes you might farm Krugs or Gromp if the situation calls for or allows it, but for the most part, you simply won't err from this rule of 6 to 7 minions per half minute at best. You farm waves slowly, you move slowly, you don't have time to rotate to other lanes to grab large waves, and you have a turret tying you to your lane and keeping you from pushing waves too far out. At some point during the mid game though, this all changes. Your DPS explodes, you group on the center of the map with access to any lane, you kill waves in 5 seconds, cannon waves in 8, camps in 9. You're now a lean, mean farming machine. You can clear a mid wave, farm raptors, red buff, Krugs, and catch a top wave, all in the amount of time it previously took you to farm 7 minions. Of course, these numbers are all subject to change depending on what ADC you're playing, but the point is that you can now absorb resources at a much faster rate than you previously could during laning. Every death from the mid game onwards should now be considered a huge setback. So now that we've covered why you need to avoid dying at all costs, how exactly do you do that? Well, there's no better answer than just focus and use your brain. At this point, every death is likely a mistake you've made at least 10 times before. It's nothing new to you, and if you were really concentrating, you'd have seen it coming. There's some really bullshit ways to die in this game that are kind of truly unavoidable, but probably the majority of your deaths are not that. Be wary when you lack vision. If the Zed is missing from the map, he is in fact coming for you and you should run as fast as you can. And stop solo farming mid when there's a Nocturne in the game because yes, he will actually ult you in the 5 seconds it takes you to clear that wave. Every time you die, make sure you learn from it and don't do it again. The majority of your deaths should come from laning phase whenever you were truly outplayed or died in a trade that was worth it, and deaths out of lane should ideally be limited to just 1 or 2, depending on the length of the game. Inspiration, watch some Reckless VODs and see how he manages to keep his average deaths below 3 while maintaining 10 assists per minute and still somehow averaging more kills and assists than you. Personally, once I started reviewing his solo queue games, I was able to reduce my average deaths from 5.5 to about 3.7, which in turn also increased my average farm by about almost 1 CS per minute, and was no doubt a huge part of why I was suddenly able to reach Master on 2 accounts soon thereafter. Though you can review any challenger ADC and learn from them, Reckless is simply the best at doing what I'm recommending here. Also, I forgot to mention it and I can't be bothered finding out how to edit it back into this video, but make sure you are avoiding the most common way of dying, which is inting with your team. If your team makes a bad decision, leave them to it and participate only as much as you can without dying. Avoiding being peer pressured into dying will already remove a good 20% of your deaths. Now that you know the importance of not dying and how to avoid it, let's talk about improving your efficiency at your primary goal during the moments that you are alive, farming to become the strongest person on the map. When you start grouping, usually after you take the enemy bot lane turret, you'll want to go mid. Mid gives you access to rotate anywhere on the map, whether that be Herald, Drake, or just ganking someone that's overextended. Your game plan should be to shove a wave before anything else, then consider what you can do on the map. If your team is hovering around the enemy team in the bot side jungle and you might be needed for that fight, you finish shoving that wave before you join. It doesn't matter that it reduces your team's chances of winning that fight, this is the pattern you need to maintain throughout the entire game in order to keep your farm up. Clear the wave, then evaluate your options. If you really want to be in a hurry, you can clear the entire wave except the Costas, since the Costas are worth less gold than XP. If nothing's going on, or anything going on is too far away for you to help with, you either push forward and hit the mid lane turret if it's safe and it actually stands a chance of going down soon, or you take the camps nearest to mid. This can be either your own jungle's camps or your enemy's camps. Ideally, you'd rather take the enemy's camps, but you need a certain amount of map control to safely do this, so either take your own jungler's wolves or his raptors. You might think your jungler would get pissed off at this, but so long as you're not farming a camp he was already on his way to, they usually won't or shouldn't mind. The later the game goes, the more they lack the time to full clear their jungle anyway. And especially in lower elos, junglers suck at farming, with silver junglers averaging 5 CS per minute, and even in diamond this only increases to 6 CS per minute. If you're not farming camps, that's a lot of resources lying around going to waste. And besides, it's not like junglers don't get plenty of farm from lanes anyway. The average jungler tends to get about 30 to 40 lane farm throughout the entirety of a game, and many have no qualms with taking farm from right under the carry's nose. In a game where people are going to be selfish and try to take all the farm that comes into their side regardless of their scaling, as the actual best scaling role, it is important you adopt a selfish mindset and optimize your farming as best as you can, even if that means taking resources that could have potentially later gone to someone else. The one thing you shouldn't do is take camps at the expense of lane farm. Taking your jungler's Krugs after shoving bot and rotating to mid is okay, but what's not okay is farming Krugs while you have minions dying bot lane because you haven't shoved them out yet. In that situation, you are costing your jungler farm while also costing yourself farm, meaning your team as a whole is losing resources as a result of every dying minion going to waste. You should only be taking jungle camps when you either have already shoved in the relevant wave, or it's unsafe and you need to wait for it to crash into you, so you're either leaving your team's overall income unchanged, or even increasing it. But with all of this in mind, if your team is in a position to pressure the enemies or objectives, whether those be turrets or neutral objectives, that's what should be your priority after farming each wave. Camps are just ways to boost your CS per minute during downtime when there's nothing else for you to do. Now, one of the biggest things people have trouble with in lower elos is they don't know what to do when their team won't let them take uncontested mid lane farm. Especially mid laners in low elo won't know how to sideline in the mid game and will stay mid taking mid farm all game long, meaning the ADC can't both free farm the same lane all game and also be permanently grouped. If your mid laner won't ever leave mid, then that's an ideal, there's no way around that, but it also is no excuse for ending the game with low farm. You simply have to adapt the best way you can, which means catching side waves whenever they're pushing onto your side of the map. You soak up the waves, then push the next one onto the enemy side of the map, if you have the necessary vision to safely do so, then you rotate back mid. Here's an example of me having to execute this concept in one of my own games. You can see here that there's a large bot lane wave pushing into our turret, and I need to farm one more wave for the items I want to get on my next back. There's hardly any point in me rotating all the way bot lane for this when I'm already mid and Lux is in base and free to move to whichever lane she chooses. So I spam ping bot lane multiple times to make it clear to her that she should catch the wave, but unfortunately she chooses to come mid anyway, even though I'm about to clear it and there won't be a wave waiting for her there. This costs her farm and also means that when I leave base, there also won't be a wave waiting for me on mid lane. Although it's too late to soak up the large wave that was pushing into our turret, the wave is still on our side of the map, meaning it is safe and fast to go and shove it out before grouping back towards mid. Although there is some brief action going on mid and the two teams continue remaining poised to fight at any second, I don't alter my route unless I'm 100% sure a fight will break out and 100% sure I'll get there in time to influence it. This is where many players give in to fear and skip farming to group mid because they're afraid their team will fight without them. After farming the first wave, I see my team starting to fight, and since I don't know if I'll even get there in time to help, I take the route of guaranteed income and farm another wave, as I know all of the enemies are currently too busy to respond to it. Even had my team not immediately engaged the fight after that first wave, I still would have shoved the second wave if all the enemies were still in that same position anyway, since it would be perfectly safe and there would be no guarantee of my team fighting or my ability to get there in time to change the outcome. After the second wave, I start farming golems, but decide instead that there's a good chance that by rotating, I will actually get there in time to at least clean up some kills, and there's no point continuing to push bot because I should expect a reviving Katarina to go and defend it. After a messy fight with some questionable ADC positioning that I will not and cannot defend, I do end up having an impact over the fight by killing Nami and setting up another kill on Katarina. In this particular instance, I get the best of both worlds by getting all the farm I wanted and still winning the fight, but the important thing is that even had the fight not gone our way, I still would have been keeping myself relevant in the game through the farm I took prior. And I entirely avoid the possible disaster scenario where I skip farm to influence the fight and we still lose the fight anyway. While obviously you shouldn't ignore fights entirely, you have to remember that you cannot guarantee their outcome, but you can usually guarantee golden XP from farm, so you should always heavily prioritize that. At the end of the day, the most important team fight is the final one of the game, and you should spend your entire game preparing to be as strong as possible for that final team fight. Being around for every single fight at the very start of that fight is of lesser importance. I've now talked about all the main things that I was personally focusing on while grinding to master and looking to improve at while VOD reviewing Challenger solo queue games, so I'm going to end the video here. I could keep going with a few more ADC tips, but believe it or not, I have already spent almost 30 hours in 3 days on this project as of recording this, and fully completing what little editing I'm capable of might take a little while longer still. So honestly, I'm pretty spent. If I make any future videos of this style, I'll probably make them more specialized towards one subject. Let me know in the comments if that's something that would interest you, and subscribe to my channel to catch future guides, and let me know that there is demand for them. In the meantime, I post daily educational commentary ADC videos where I try my best to explain to you how to play the ADC role and each champion, so also consider subscribing if that's something that interests you. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like to help get this video into the YouTube algorithm, and I hope to catch you guys on the next one. Later, gamers.